Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Tool Talk featuring ripgen. I'm Joe Seckman, AVP of R&D at Bishop Fox, and your host for today. Before we get started, I'd like to run through a few quick housekeeping items. To submit questions, use the Q&A tool on the left of your dashboard. We will try to answer throughout the webcast, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end. If you experience any problems during the webcast, please let us know by using the questions module or the help tool. A recorded version of this webcast will be made available promptly when we conclude, and we will send out a link to the on-demand video. Now, let's meet today's guest speaker. Justin, please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Justin Reinhardt. I've been here at Bishop Fox for about 2 years now. I'm a senior analyst over on the attack surface intelligence team, over on Cosmos team. Before that, I was a full-time bug bounty hunter, and yeah. Cool.
Well, hey, welcome to Bishop Fox, first and foremost. And second, thanks for joining me today to talk about ripgen. All right, let's cover our agenda here. First, we'll start off with the anatomy of a subdomain, then go and move on to the basics of ripgen, just to discuss the tool, and of course, offer some personal anecdotes of how we use ripgen internally within the Cosmos team. And as always, save some time at the end for some Q&A. But before we get started there, I'd like to take a little bit of a measure from our audience with this quick poll question. How important is subdomain discovery for security testing? Critically important, somewhat important, or not important at all? And while we wait to get some responses here and get a good idea of what people think about subdomain discovery as a testing step, Justin, I wanted to kind of jump ahead a little bit and ask you, once we've got, let's just assume that we've got all of the domains and subdomains for our particular client that we're testing, what's next as far as testing, the testing methodology and the testing process?
Over in the Cosmos team, we do like continuous, attack surface enumeration and discovery and testing. So, a lot of times it's sort of going out and, seeing what's out there. Like, I really like doing like screenshot review, because sometimes that can bring up things that, you can't, like there's targets that look, stinky, I guess you would say. Right, that like, and there's not really a great way for, a platform to pick up on that. So something like doing that, and then going over and, seeing what our, our system finds, and then, picking out some targets to do, some targeted, like dir searching against, right, and like some content, brute forcing.
I definitely understand what you mean by stinkiness. It's like you can just look at a site, and if you've been doing pen testing or bug bounties or anything like that for a while, you can look at it and know, I know that's vulnerable, or there's a high probability that there's something going on with that one for sure. Yeah. So, excellent.
The copyright 2009 and down at the bottom. And, okay.
Yeah, maybe some hygiene related observations that can lead you to a certain area of what you can check and what you can go through. So yeah, I think one of my mentors early on in my career said something very similar. He's like, I can just smell the vulnerabilities of this web application just by looking at it and seeing certain details.
Yeah. Navigating around, looking at some of the parameters as well, and the URLs.
Yeah, just as the start, before you've even started digging in. It's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a look at our poll results and see. All right, fantastic. We've got, thankfully, nobody thinks it's not important at all. Critically important and somewhat important. That's an interesting dynamic here. We hope at the end we'll definitely be able to articulate into this webcast, Tool Talk, be able to articulate the importance of subdomain discovery in a little bit of a different light to see kind of why it's so important. Okay, from here, Justin, I'd like to kick it over to you to talk a little bit about subdomains and why it's important in offensive security, as well as just go quickly, just the anatomy of a subdomain.
For sure. Right. Cosmos, that's all like, as it says, like on the attack surface intelligence team. So this is like sort of our like bread and butter, is discovering all the things that there are to discover, about a company. And a lot of like, one of like the really important steps in that is doing subdomain discovery. And there's, a lot of different tools that do this. But it's like, when you look at a subdomain, right, you'll see like, this is like, rental at uber.com or whatever. And the other one's like rental-staging.uber.com. I don't know the actual subdomains, but, you can tell like what sort of environment they're using, whether it be staging, test, QA, all of these have different, functional purposes within a company, right? So they all could look differently. They all might have different, functionality. Some of them might, be hooked to different backends. A lot of times, you see things on staging environments that, right, like admin tends to work more on staging, or you have like these weak like credential pairs that work more against staging environments, just because they're never meant to be public. Generally security is a little bit weaker on those. So sometimes, finding these sort of things is really neat. But
yeah, I was just going to say, speaking of backends as well, and defense in depth, you would like to think that it's got the kind of the lowered shields of the staging environment, but the back end may be, attached to a staging database as well. But the data that's contained within that database may very well be a snapshot from production that's just replicated through, because we need representative data to test, which is something that I've seen overall, several times in my career as well. So this is interesting just to look at from this example right here on the uber.com. We've got bonjour.uber.com and bonjour-staging.uber.com. And I know a lot of times companies adopt their own vernacular and language. Like some people may call it staging, some may call it dev or development, and that kind of plants the seed for why ripgen is so important. I'll go ahead and move there so we can start talking about the tool itself. Why don't you cover a little bit of the basics here?
Yeah. So at the heart of ripgen, it's created to take a list of subdomains and sort of break them apart into different words. And then you sort of mix all these words together to try to find more subdomains that possibly you couldn't find otherwise. And this is really important, because when you're talking about like working from the outside in, especially like in bug bounties or like any of these pen tests where you don't have like a zone file or like a definitive source of truth for these subdomains, right? You're working with only what you can find, which is you can never be 100% sure that you have everything. And so like generating more names based on an established naming convention, using the words that that the company uses, right? It could be like dev, it could be development, right? It's impossible to sort of, always have a great dictionary for like a specific company and specific service. So this kind of creates that for you, right? Where it's very tailored to the words that it sees. So as you see, like a generic, very common tool for finding subdomains is Subfinder, and it found 369 domains. It uses multiple different sources like cert.sh, some of the other like sort of free APIs, if you will. And then you see that we pipe that into ripgen to create this word list. And it turns those 369 domains or subdomains into a list of 843,000 potential subdomains. To give you an idea of like the scale of, sort of what this does and how many, permutations that it creates. And then, once we get to the end of that, we see that, I think it finds 20 odd extra subdomains that we would never have found without it, which is it's really neat. And a lot of the times this is important too, because if people are going, very commonly attack the lowest hanging fruit, and it's just what they can find. So, the more things you're finding, the more things that probably haven't been looked at by other people, perhaps, or, they might be newer, or, any number of things. But it's really important, especially for me, to get down and find things that, perhaps haven't been seen by, other people as much.
Yeah, and I know some of the options for ripgen. It seems like it's a fairly straightforward tool, but it seems like there's some legwork that you need to do a little bit in advance with creating a word list. I guess that's kind of tweaking the terminology based off the target. Can you go into kind of how that process is done, or what's your methodology or process for creating an initial word list to run ripgen with?
Ripgen, it comes with, right, by default, if you just feed it a list of subdomains, it'll go and use the words in the subdomains. You can also provide it with additional words to, substitute in all these different places for all these different permutations. If there is something in particular about a target they use that perhaps isn't seen in a list of subdomains, or, you just want to create more with very common terminology, like it might be that you haven't seen the word dev or in, the way they, in their subdomains, but that it's a common word. So you can feed it extra words to use for permutations. Also some other settings, like you can choose how short or long a word you want. So if you have a lot of very small parts that you don't want it necessarily pick up on, you can filter those out.
Yeah, so it seems to me like there's and I think it was evidenced by the 8,000 or 843,000 results that can be generated here. Where's the happy medium of the effectiveness of being targeted and more surgical in an aspect of what results you get out of ripgen versus having the ocean returned and as a result?
Yeah, right. So subdomain brute forcing is can take a while, depending. So I usually try to keep it on, domains with under 1,000, subdomains, just so it doesn't, get crazy out of control, because the number sort of, ramps up almost exponentially. The more words you have, it's applying those to all the other subdomains that it finds. And so it is nice when on small to medium targets, right? If you put it on a very large target, you're going to be sitting there resolving domains for a long time.
Yeah, and I think going back to the poll question about how important is subdomain discovery, I always think about it, and tell me if you agree or maybe expand upon kind of my thinking and how this all works together. Asset discovery is a key component in terms of continuous security testing in general, because without the initial identification, attribution of ownership of the initial asset, you can't go and start enumerating the attack surface that specific asset represents. So it's kind of step one, discover all of the assets. Step two, enumerate the attack surface of said asset. And then step three, find vulnerabilities, find hygiene issues, and report kind of ways to articulate risk as it results to the attack surface. Is that kind of a similar step and approach and methodology that the Cosmos team employs?
Yeah. One of the, it's so important that we have continuous, discovery. So, there are systems in place to go out and find, was there a new subdomain created yesterday, right, that we could find, right? And so sort of to keep sort of going out and finding new things, right? A great source for this is the certificate transparency log, right, which has a log of every TLS certificate created, right? And so as soon as there's a certificate created, it's put onto this log, and you can see. So it's one of the right, the many things you can monitor in order to do continuous security. But it is very important, and there's a lot of interesting bugs where say something has just spun up, you see the certificate created for it, 5 minutes ago, and you go and look at it, and they haven't had the chance to, rotate the default creds for the service yet. They just put it, straight online. And so, right, the faster you find things, and the more things you find like that, the quicker you can get to the vulns. Perhaps, before they're, even, the team wouldn't even think they were an issue.
Yeah, that's another good point too. I was thinking as well, like with this brute forcing of subdomains, like how often do we report to our customers domains or subdomains that they've never even knew existed? I mean, it seems like that may be a common, I don't know how common that is.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of time. We heard a few times that's like, oh, we didn't even know this was a thing. So that's always a nice feeling, especially like from on the attack surface side of things, being like, okay, like that's a win.
Yeah, absolutely. That's additional understanding and articulation of the attack surface. Now, we've got a question that's come in that I think is really, really on point here. Specifically, how does ripgen establish the existence of a subdomain? Does it just ping the potential subdomain names?
Ripgen is a tool strictly for generating names. So I guess I didn't cover this part, but you can see that I take the word list from that ripgen created, and I pass it to a tool that does resolving, DNSX. And so it automatically does sort of resolving, and it's very important for this sort of thing that you have a tool that also removes wildcards, because wildcards can definitely throw you for a loop. Wildcards, anything, right? It's like a catch-all record, so it might resolve, but all these things resolve to the same IP set.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So it's essentially step one, develop the list. Step two, use a different tool to validate, whether it's actually live. And I think that kind of applies in other areas as well. If you're doing just initial discovery or typo squatting or things of that nature as well, that secondary, resolution step will be outside of those initial tools. It looks like I missed a question early on when we just got started here. With tools like Dirbuster and the inherent risk of running in the ClearNet, are there similar risks to using ripgen, and would ripgen work over Tor?
So since ripgen doesn't make any actual network root host itself, right? It's just for creating the sort of, this list. There's no need to do something like that, because there's no, it doesn't make any network connections itself. I would say there are definitely, like, for resolving subdomains, like sometimes you do, want to do that, sort of across multiple IPs or something, because, for multiple reasons. Like, I enjoy running this sort of like across like a little tiny cluster, a house, just to spread out the, right, where you're going. But yeah, it's all right with DNS being all UDP. There's not a necessarily an aspect where Tor like super would help in this situation.
Okay, excellent. So I think that's a good transition for a quick reminder. We'll move to our Q&A phase of this tool talk. If you have any questions, please submit them using the Q&A tool. I'll go through a couple more that we've got submitted here. First, what are the primary reasons? Oh, first, I think this is a great question, because I don't think we mentioned this earlier. Apparently somebody knows some of the history about ripgen. What are the primary reasons and advantages for ripgen versus DNSgen? And maybe go over what DNSgen is and its relationship to ripgen.
So ripgen is sort of a newer take on, the concept of subdomain permutation, which has been, sort of, it's not by any means a new technique. There's been a lot of tools, like there's, this is based on a tool called DNSgen, which is a Python script. Right, Python is not known for being very performant, And so, right, where, the Python DNS gen might take 5 minutes, ripgen might take, like 10 seconds or something. It's very much so quicker because it's written in, Rust. My friend Donut, who wrote this, is a very big Rust fan. So he really enjoys writing things in Rust just to, like show off how fast it is. All the, it's great to get those performance boosts. And it's like anywhere you can take it, especially doing this on like at scale, right? Like you're talking about like, okay, 5 minutes to, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. Well, it might not seem like too crazy. When you talk about starting to do this at scale, that's a massive time save. It enables you to do this across larger, data sets.
Yeah, so performance, it sounds like that's a great question there. Next question we've got here: what types of vulnerabilities or weaknesses can be exploited by attackers that perform subdomain discovery operations? And I guess this is mainly saying, like, once I've discovered a subdomain, what kinds of things can be done?
Yeah, I think I have two sort of favorite findings. One of them was on the staging version of a target. There was just admin API keys like hard coded into the the actual like source code of the site that weren't there on the on the normal one, and it was they had like this functionality where there's like a toolbar where you could add users or whatever. So it was very obviously not supposed to be public, but all right, you had these like API keys that were exposed and all these sort of different functionality that was exposed especially for testing. Right, but it had these keys where you could do all sorts of things that weren't even in the sort of like set testing regime. And the other ones, like I said before, is like default creds. A lot of these use very weak creds, but as you said, a lot of the times the staging data is just a copy of the prod data. So when you get access to that, you have right. It's very similar to having owned the production environment.
Yeah, data's king, right? Okay, looks like we've got another follow-up question. Repeat the name of the tool that you use once the potential subdomains are created in ripgen.
I use DNSX, which is it's a project discovery tool. There's also like mass DNS, and there's a few other tools that are specifically created just to resolve subdomains. I like DNSX because it's very, very simple, right? Like if we go back a slide, you'll see like I just sort of am able to pass it up here at the top, right? Like a list of resolvers. So I always use multiple resolvers so that I'm not just hammering one single resolver. So it automatically will round robin through them. I do -NW for no wildcards, and then I just have it pushed to an output file.
Okay.
All sort of the same flags from Subfinder work in like DNSX as well, right? That's one of the nice things about all these project discovery tools is that you can sort of pass them all the same flags. But yeah, right. And you can specify threads, it's -T. But by no means, like I said, do you have to use exactly the same thing. If you're more familiar or comfortable with another, tool, feel free to use that.
Okay, this is kind of strikes at the heart of ripgen question here. Which do you prefer, basic subdomain brute forcing using a large word list, or ripgen, which works better, or prefer both to discover subdomains?
Usually I'll take a large list first and I'll run that over. There's some lists out there that are, just absolutely massive, and you sort of just let it go and come back to it tomorrow sort of thing. So ripgen works best from sort of an informed perspective. So once you get that list, it's really good at taking what you found and creating more of the things that look like that, which is sort of like the important part here is that, it speaks the same language they do. So it's using all the same, finding things for the same, code words for, projects or, like the Uber one is bonjour staging, dash staging, right? It's like bonjour might not be in a traditional word, or bonjour, whatever might be in a word list, but bonjour dash staging might not be. And so it's taking all of those things once you already know what exists and creating new things out of it. So they really complement each other very well.
Okay. All right, we've got time for one more question here. How often, we kind of touched on this earlier, but maybe we can provide a little bit more guidance here. How often should organizations inventory their domain and subdomain ecosystems?
Like I said, on the Cosmos team, we're a big fan of the continuous method of doing things. So just constantly checking for new things, right? It's, if you have a good inventory already, a lot of the times, if you're working in AWS, you might have, already sort of full visibility of your environment, depending, but from the outside looking in perspective, I really enjoy having just the continuous, method going on, even for, sort of my own bug bounty purposes. I really, I enjoy that because, you're informed of when new things are popping up. And, but I mean, other than that, I would say if you're, you're not quite there yet, you don't have the infrastructure in place, sort of like one of those things you can put on a cron job and do every week, sort of. Yeah. It also depends on your organization, how quickly you spin things up and down, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned earlier too, it's a competition. Find these assets before somebody else exploits it, either with malicious purposes or with bug bounty purposes, or just, you've got payouts that come into mind with that aspect as well. So it's a continuous race to find assets that are vulnerable to exploitation that can be found. So yeah, I totally agree. I think it makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, with that, Justin, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and sharing your knowledge about subdomain enumeration and ripgen specifically.
Thanks
really appreciate it. To our audience, thank you as well. We'd love your feedback on this Tool Talk. Please remember to fill out our survey and to register for episode 6 of our Tool Talk series, which will be on June 8th, where we will talk about debugging Ruby exploits with a custom test harness created by one of our very own researchers here at Bishop Fox. I've seen some of the presentations internally within Bishop Fox on this subject by the speaker, and it's fantastic. You won't want to miss it. You can find the registration link in the related content section of the presentation console to save your spot. We also invite you to join our Bishop Fox Redaction Challenge and test your own redaction reversal skills. You can access the link for this challenge in the related content. It will run through August 14th, and winners will be announced at DEF CON 30. For more information, check out Tool Talk Episode 4 on Unredactor to learn more. Once again, thank you all very much for attending, and have a great day.